am not a huge horror buff insofar as having watched a ton of films in the genre, but I have absolutely spent more than my fair share of time consuming content about and around it so as to implicitly understand no small amount of what comes with it. As a result, I was super happy to experience Weapons and particularly to experience it all but blind. Weapons is a film that both takes and utilizes several ideas that anybody might be familiar with, whether because of horror films or not, while also using them in ways just enough its own to not feel cheap or rehashed. More importantly than the familiar that Weapons brings to the table is the fact that it is centered around a core question, which the film's own description tells you and was all I knew about it going in. And that question is unraveled and answered over time in ways that the viewer guesses at every turn before it is actually given to them, largely because of some of the familiar ideas and tropes as said before, but also because of many, many technical decisions that are just so good. This movie is incredible. So that introductory paragraph was probably a heap of nonsensical gobbledygook, so let's try to flesh out my thoughts a little bit more, get a better idea of what it is that actually makes Weapons work so well. I will largely avoid spoilers throughout this review, but there will be minor things sprinkled throughout, so if you really want to go in blind, I recommend not continuing this review, and I mean it. I went into this thing effectively blind, and I'm really glad I did so, and so for simplicity's sake, I recommend it to you. But now for the actual review. Weapons is a very, very good film, and that isn't entirely just conjecture. From a technical perspective, the actual filmmaking is quite impressive in very many regards. Though there aren't an absurd amount of wowing cinematographic decisions made to really push any boundaries, I'm actually usually a firm believer that simpler is better. As such, Weapons strikes a great balance between those two sides. There are plenty of really great shots, don't get me wrong, but it never seeks to distract the viewer with, see this crazy over-the-top idea I came up with for this shot? None of that kind of nonsense. And yet it knows how and when to diversify the shots taken and how to weave many threads through the various chapters of the film so as to be really effective in spite of that. I get the sense that nearly every section of the movie has its own unique directorial style and cinematographic style, but never distractingly so. In fact, I'm inclined to watch this thing a second time just to pay even more attention to the technical aspects of it, solely to see what I can pick apart on that side of the conversation. But what made it very clear that there is at least some level of direct intention in the application of cinematography and capturing each scene was James's section in particular, where an erratic and twitchy nature of the drug-addled character translates straight onto the less stable camera shots and, to use the term again, erratic editing decisions. That was awesome. But it is far from the only technically impressive aspect of Weapons. Oh no, far from it. The lighting of the film is great, never succumbing to a too dark color palette so as to make the important moments unintelligible, and also granting sharp accent in many scenes that fill the atmosphere of the film to just the right degree. And speaking of atmosphere, the sound design and music are just incredible. They are punchy without being offensive, and also takes so many moments to actually remain silent, which contrasts so well with the moments where things actually get louder. For example, there are plenty of moments where the camera is completely across the room from its subjects. You can tell the characters are speaking with one another, but instead of having that dialogue audible, as if the camera were in the room with them, like very many other films do, and which isn't necessarily a bad decision, Weapons chooses to use silence in moments to let the viewer infer what is being said, or simply uses the shots as set dressing for a couple of seconds before another shot takes you to the important conversation that does need to happen. In either case, I like this. The music takes a similar approach. It is shockingly subtle the vast majority of the time, to the point where I'm pretty sure there are perhaps bigger chunks of the movie than you might expect without any OST at all, where there might typically be something dramatic, and where the soundtrack does cut in, it supports the tension of the scenes so damn well on account of the subtlety I mentioned before. It's not at all a soundtrack I would ever consider just listening to. It's not that kind of music. But as far as meshing with the tone and editing of the movie, it's absolutely brilliant. And on that note, I do really want to talk about the editing and construction of weapons. This section is going to contain the most implicitly spoilery material, however, so do be warned of that. I will yet try to remain fairly spoiler-free, but one cannot talk about the editing of this motion picture without at least spoiling its structure and also spoiling other minor moments. Following the opening narration and a little extra cold open, the viewer is faced with a black screen and just one word on it: Justine. At first, I was a smidgen confused by this, but then I quickly forgot about it as the film proceeds with her as the main character, exploring her psyche in regards to what has unfolded in the town and her place within it, particularly as the primary suspect in the eyes of the townfolk. The editing first proves it's going to be punchy when Justine shuts the door of her car in one shot to open it immediately at another location, jumping the distance in a creative instant, rather than wasting seconds watching her leave or pull up to certain locations. When the film does this a second time, fairly shortly afterwards, it reiterates its commitment to an evocative editing philosophy, and it continues to prove this as time goes on in Justine's POV. I won't summarize to you the entire film, for obvious reasons, but just know that the handling of shots and overall editing impressed me, not so much for its flashiness, but for its practicality that doesn't veer too far into simple utilitarianism. What grabbed my attention was, after a solid chunk of runtime, having forgotten the Justine card early on, when the perspective changes to Archer, a father of one of the kids who disappears, one of Justine's students' father. He is trying to find answers based on what the police are and aren't doing, as best as he can, and this is all done in a manner very pessimistic and suspicious of Justine. A shot shows that he was the one in the cold open demanding for Justine to explain herself at a meeting at the school before it is reopened. His story teases some of the directorial and broader style of the movie that cut through, first being the editing and prop decisions that allow viewers to guess answers to questions previously put down, such as who painted which on the side of Justine's car, and second, more importantly, it clues us into the way weapons will frequently cut backwards in time to cover what a different character has been doing before converging it with the previously known material, which it then takes forward a little bit. At this point, we jump to Paul, once again shifting time back closer to the start and letting us view events over the time period from a different character's perspective, although most of Paul's story is actually fairly separate from Justine's and Archer's. But more than just the timeline stuff, Paul's section plays a bit with what is not shown in other sections, most particularly Justine's here, at least early on. Weapons as a whole likes to include very minor time jumps, leaving just enough material for the viewer to infer what happened, but saving the explicit shots that confirm said inferences for later. This goes a long way in supporting the editing prowess required to make the overall storyline work as a result of the character and time hopping. I overall just really liked it. There's more stuff to follow, but I'm not going to sit here and give the whole thing away. Besides, I can't properly remember the exact ordering of these sections anyway, and no amount of looking things up is giving me a clear enough answer, so I'm cutting the semi-summarization off here. The point that I want to make by giving you an idea of how the structural ethos of weapons plays out is to say that it takes some very intricate writing and editing to actually pull these things off, and I'm of the opinion that it was very well pulled off here. Furthermore, I mentioned already how Weapons does great at leaving certain things off the screen at times when viewers can infer what's missing, and I've used that word probably several more times than I've strictly needed to in this video. But the whole inference dynamic with the viewers is generally just another huge part of what makes things work. This, again, is enhanced by the editing. Hell, as the movie goes on, more and more questions get answered. Many of these answers in any other film would be akin to info dumps, over-explaining the reveals so as to kill their effect in their tracks. Weapons does come pretty close to this at some points, especially in the third act when one particular POV section basically gives us all of the answers outright. But Zach Cregger negates the negative effect of this explanation-heavy film by utilizing the established structure and other directorial decisions so as to lead the audience to those bigger answers he comes to reveal at the end. In that way, I had already been guessing at what was really going on for the entire film, getting closer and closer to the correct answer until I actually had it. And I had it right as Cregger was beginning to reveal all, for me to relish in what I had already figured out. That was a very rewarding experience and one that is not easy to pull off, so props to the filmmakers, all of them, for managing such a feat. Moreover, another part of why the explanations don't feel too explicit is because there are just as many details surrounding those answers left unsaid to yet leave me guessing at their meaning. There's obviously plenty of biblical allusions going on in here and other minor commentaries being hinted at, and these go a long way to providing material to chew on over time. And there's also the ending of the movie, which is perhaps a bit more abrupt than I expected, but even that leaves just enough solved and just enough more open-ended to leave me wondering. I have a buddy who predicted Weapons would be a fantastic rewatch, and he confirmed it was when he did so. I believe him because the more I think about Weapons' structure, editing, subtleties, the more I myself want to rewatch it. But though we ought to be done on the more technical side of the discussion for the purposes of my review, I do have more things I want to talk about in regards to tone. I may have already mentioned how the general tone and tension in Weapons is something that I find super special and engaging. A tone and tension developed and accentuated by the cinematography and direction, the lighting, the sound design and music, and also the editing and structure of the movie on top of it all. But Weapons is a horror movie, and so a key aspect of whether or not the tension and suspense on offer is satisfied is, of course, found within the scares. To the man well versed in horror, or who's watched tons of material within the genre, Weapons isn't really that scary. I mean, there's a lot of dread at times, and there are brilliant jump scares at points, but scaring the viewer isn't the entire point. In fact, looking back, a couple of the scares are kind of strange in that I'm not actually sure why, diegetically, those scares exist, but they are effective. So effective that the movie scarcely even relies on them. Hell, by the back half of the film, and especially by the time a lot of the answers are being given to you, the scary moments are less terrifying and more suspenseful, which is a kind of tone that is far more bearable in a lot of ways. I mean, I believe that the fear of the unknown is that which all other fears are based on in one way or another, and if nothing else, fear of the unknown is the most palpable form of it. But by the end of Weapons, that unknown is now actually known, so much of the fear isn't scary. This sounds like a critique, but it's actually just the backdrop to why the scary moments of Weapons work so well. Zach Cregger understands quite intrinsically that the manner of storytelling within the film inherently reduces the intensity of the fear factor as it goes on, so he purposely front-loads the real affecting scares into the front half, when that unknown quality is still exactly that, while the mystery of the premise is still being explored by the characters. The dreams that a couple of characters have and the two really memorable jump scares associated with them are so brilliant, and it's kind of impossible to say just how brilliant they are, but I'll try. The jump scares and Weapons are timed better than anything I can imagine. The first one is halfway standard, but the moment of the scare and the manner of it are just different enough from what you expect based on the shots prior to it that it really gets you. Hindsight is 20/20, so it seems very obvious the timing was right where it was meant to be, but even so, I felt caught off guard in the theater. That one set me on edge, and by the time my buddy and I were at the second major scare of the film, we were juked twice by the timing of it, just to be surprised again by the actual scare when it occurred. And that scare occurred in such a manner that we audibly swore in the theater when it happened. I am not often vocal when I'm scared this way, beyond maybe a curse under my breath alongside a jump or something along those lines. Not to say I don't get scared, but that my reactions are relatively muted. But we jumped and swore as a natural reaction to the second scare, and it was amazing. I will remember that moment for a very long time. But notice that I only speak of a couple of scares, and jump scares more specifically. There are a couple more than this, of course, and there are a few scenes that are terrifying from a non-jump scare perspective as well, but Weapons really does not rely on scares. It relies more on tension, and the tense scenes are arguably scarier than the jump scares anyway. There are one or two such sequences that had me swatting my buddy's hands away from his face to make sure he was still watching the movie. One of those had the perfect degree of silence, which I believe I mentioned earlier, that really sold it for me, producing yet another moment I hardly think I'll be able to forget. But back to that Weapons does not purely rely on scares point I made. Not only is this film not the most terrifying in that it doesn't overdo any of what makes it scary and lets up on some of those things as time goes on, the entire film has a really great sense of levity that I also wanted to shout out. There are tons of little lines and moments that get chuckles that are natural and delivered well, and they make all the difference for me. In fact, the second major jump scare that got me so bad is immediately followed by a reaction that was hilarious in spite of itself, and hilarious because of how affecting the scare was. I just thought Weapons succeeded immensely in both the scary department and the levity as a general rule. My complaints with the film are relatively few and far between. I will admit readily that the more I think about it, the more things I notice that seem left underutilized and a bit random, or like the existence was relatively pointless, ? And I mean that, by the way. Even while writing this review, there were several random details that cropped into my head that I'm really not sure what they were there for. But I'm also open to the ideas that, 1, some of those things I might catch in a rewatch. 2, some of those things are evidently meant to be left up to interpretation. And 3, the rest is stuff that doesn't actually bother me at all. Whatever complaints I have are so minor that they in no way impact what I see as the heart of the film, because the things that are central are done so well that I really just loved my time with Weapons. Yeah, Donna's character is entirely pointless, or almost entirely so. The premise doesn't end up really being the thing the movie is about like you would expect. The random floating firearm is super weird and random on the one end, and also a little too on the nose and silly in its inclusion on the other end. The lack of thoroughness in regards to Alex's questioning seems almost unbelievably short-sighted of the detectives. The ideas regarding the answers to the film's mystery are somewhat cliché or even uninspired, though I think they are utilized to great effect given the context of the movie's structure with multiple POVs and whatever else have you. There are plenty more things I could point out, but I don't feel like I need to. I already said that I don't feel like the things I could complain about do anything to harm the execution of what is done so well, and that the heart of what's being portrayed remains intact the whole way as well. I can understand the criticisms that some may have about the film not really doing enough to explore some of the thematic subject matter it seems at first like it is going to tackle, and how the abruptness of the ending leaves many of the thematic threads a bit looser than they ought. But even these things, which in most other circumstances I might also be complaining about, these things don't really bother me either. Weapons opens up the doors to conversation regarding many of those things, whether that be the more implicit ideas, which may or may not be based on certain biblical ideas, the social commentary, which is somewhat obviously being hinted at, or whether they be the more overt ideas surrounding grief and the way communities wind up tackling such a thing. And the open door to said conversations, I think, is better left open and sort of in the background for the case of Weapons. All in all, I really, really enjoyed my time with this film, and legitimately think I may go see it a second time. Well, in classic King Crusoe fashion, this review wound up being much longer than I expected, and also a bit longer than I wanted it to be as well. But I think I said basically all the important things I wanted to, so that'll have to do it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Though movie magic isn't going to be the most regular occurrence on this channel, I am excited to say I will have at least one more big episode coming next month, talking about the OG Indiana Jones trilogy, which I'm really looking forward to rewatching here very soon. In fact, September is looking to be a very Indiana Jones oriented month in general as far as my scripted content goes, so if you're into that, I really hope you subscribe. If you're into gaming Let's Plays and or live streams, stay tuned for a Ghost of Tsushima playthrough I planned to stream on the channel, hopefully starting this month, but definitely through September as we come up to Ghost of Yote's release in early October. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. For now, I have been your host, King Crusoe. You can call me KC, and I hope to see you all in the next video.